In this large area of Africa that we are calling West and Central Africa that we're studying here, there are many, many physical regions. There are a couple of really dry areas, and one of them is the world's largest. So the Sahara Desert is the world's largest hot desert in in the entire world. There are some cold ones that are in more tundra type things, cold, dry areas that are bigger, but this is the largest that is near the equator and is an essentially dry all the time desert. And the dry areas also are in the extreme south part of this region as well. And kind of in between those two dry areas, there are grasslands and rainforests, and the rainforests are right in the center of Africa, kind of right in the heart of Africa. And that is where, it's warm all the time, but it's also very rainy, which has caused these jungle type rainforests to grow. However, in Africa in general, and especially in this area, there are not very many landforms. Africa is basically, when you think about it, you can think about it as one really big plateau. And so it's raised land, but it's flat land. And so you really don't see very many major highland mountain chains in the region at all. So we're not really going to be able to study a whole bunch of different mountain chains like we have in every other continent. Instead, it's just a generally high up in the air, high elevation, but flat area. Some of the biggest physical regions in the area, though, are drainage basins, and these drainage basins are some of the largest ones in the entire world. And if you remember, a basin is like a bowl, right? And we talked about the Amazon basin, but these are other ones, and it's an area of land where all of the rain from there drains into the same area. And three of the largest ones in the world are the Chad Basin, the Niger Basin, and the Congo Basin. And the Chad Basin all runs into this huge shallow lake that is called Lake Chad. And so I'll get red, and this right here is Lake Chad. And so there's a massive amount of water that runs into this area, and it creates this huge shallow lake. Now, the Niger Basin is the largest basin the basin that feeds the largest river in all of West Africa, and that feeds the Niger River, which is this next area down. It's all in here. And so that basin feeds that really big river. Now, the Congo Basin is a little bit different. The Congo Basin feeds all of these different rivers, and it gets the most rain. It is the largest basin in Africa. And so what it does is it creates a whole bunch of different rivers that it flow off of this Congo Basin, and it is the kind of area of Africa with the most navigable rivers, meaning it has the most rivers that ships can go up and down to deliver goods, and so very, very useful rivers. The other thing that is another major physical region is the Sahel, and so it's Sahara Desert, and then it goes into the Sahel, and the Sahel is a semi-arid region, so it's pretty dry, and it's between the Sahara Desert and the rainforests themselves, and so it's kind of this grassland area that's pretty dry, only has a few months of wet season, and so there are some shrubs that are there, and there are also trees, but all of the plants that grow there can handle being dry for long periods of time and not having very much water. There are also many different climates in Africa, and Africa is kind of an interesting continent because it is half in the northern hemisphere and about half in the southern hemisphere. So the equator runs kind of right down the middle, as you can see in this picture here. There's that equator, okay? And so Africa is not only that, but it's also a very flat country. And so as you're moving over the land, it's basically only latitude that says, so distance from the equator, that says what the climate is going to be. And so over the course of West and Central Africa, it kind of slowly changes. The the climates slowly change from arid, meaning that desert, into some semi-arid like the Sahel, into the tropical wet and dry, where there's a wet season and a dry season, and dense tropical forests, into humid subtropical with a little bit more like what we have in the southern United States. And again, the equator has a big change on it, so the wet, or it's really wet and lots of rain and stuff by the equator, and then it gets drier as you move away, and that happens in both directions. As you move north it gets drier, and as you move south it gets drier. So you see the deserts on the northernmost ends and the southernmost ends of Africa. Another ecosystem that we see in Africa is the savanna, and the savanna is a very large flat grassland with scattered trees that can handle having just a little bit of water, a lot like the Sahel, but a little bit more rain and things like that, where there's grass instead of sand and desert. Very, very close. The savanna is very close to the tropical forest, and close to the tropical forest, it's a lot of woodland. As you get further away and closer to the desert, it is mostly shrubs, and you don't see as many trees in those areas. Now, something we want to look at now that we kind of have looked at before is a climate graph, and you have to know how to read a climate graph to be successful on this exam that comes with this unit. And so it's important that you kind of look at this one and understand what it's doing. The red line, there's a line on this graph, and there are blue bars on this graph as well. And the red line is the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and you can see where each temperature is if you look at the right side, the y-axis on the right side, because it goes up from 0 to 10 degrees to 20 degrees, 30, 40, 50, and it says the average temperature is that. And then the precipitation with the blue is on the left side, and so that is, half an inch of precipitation, 1 inch, and 1.5 inches. And so both of these things are shown on a climate graph. It shows the climate, and it shows them on average in each month. And so you can see in June, let's pick June. June's right here. Okay, on average, there is about 0.3 inches of precipitation. I can tell that by moving this over here, and then I go up, 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 and here's June, and it is on average about 75 degrees Fahrenheit for the temperature. So you can read each month and the averages on this one map in both precipitation and temperature, which are the main components of weather and climate. In Africa, they've had to come up with strategies to deal with the difficult environment that they deal with on a daily basis. And so for example, in Chad, only about 3% of the land is arable, and the word arable simply means that it can be farmed. You can actually farm things and grow things there. And so in that northern part, hardly anybody lives there. And so hardly anybody lives there. The only people that live in the north are the nomads, people that don't have a permanent home, and they move from place to place and live in tents and things like that. Most of the people, not the nomads, but most of the people live in the wetter southern part. And in the wetter southern part, they actually can grow crops. And one of the crops that's grown is cotton. In Nigeria, however, there is good land. A lot of the land is arable, and they also have resources such as minerals and oil. And as they're grabbing these minerals and oil, the big problem is that they are polluting their land and destroying their land as they're doing this. As about, with their oil pipeline, about 1.5 million tons of oil has been dripping from the pipelines and seeping itself into the land and into the water and polluting the air as well. Many countries in Africa have really, really good resources underground as well. For example, Angola, Cameroon, and Chad have massive, massive oil reserves that they're able to use to make some money. And Democratic Republic of Congo is known for its minerals, things like copper and diamonds and uranium, which is used for nuclear energy, as well as other minerals. There are also big, extensive diamond mines in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Now, these diamond mines, these mineral resources can bring a lot of wealth to a country, but they can also bring a lot of conflict to the region where people are fighting for control over those areas between countries and within countries. And so it can turn into really nasty fight. The major environmental problems in Africa are desertification and deforestation. And desertification is using the arable land, that farmable land, inappropriately, and it turns into desert. So when it's dry, their people are taking their animals and allowing them to eat the grass, and eventually there's not enough grass, and if it stays dry enough, then all the good dirt can blow away and leave you with worthless desert. And so it's making the actual good land turn into desert because it's not being used appropriately. Deforestation is also happening, where trees in the rainforest are being cut way faster than they can possibly be replaced. And this is what's happening when that happens, is the soil starts to dry out and become worthless because it's not protected from these really hot sun baking it by the trees like it normally is. The place where this has been the biggest issue has been in the country of the Ivory Coast. And the Ivory Coast has cleared more than 90% of their forests. And it's been cleared mostly by foreign companies that come in from another country to help fuel their industries at the expense of the environment of this third world country. So in Africa, as in anywhere else that we've talked about, the people live where it's easy to live. And so in Nigeria has a high percentage of arable land and has all those minerals and resources and good things. And so, of course, they have the biggest population of any country in Africa at about 148 million people. Fewer, or any country in this region at least. There are fewer people that live in the really desert, the nations that are mostly desert. For example, the pretty large nation over here of Mauritania, which I'm kind of circling and coloring in a little bit, has only 3.3 million people, which is less than the city of Minneapolis-St. Paul for the entire country. Some of the people have, it's seen as a rural continent where people are mostly farmers in Africa, but a lot of the people have started to move to major cities. And they've done this for a number of different reasons. For example, crop failures. If their crops fail and they need to go find a job, that is one thing. If there's conflict and they don't feel safe, they may move into the cities, as well as desertification that we've talked about in the Sahel is sending a lot of people to the cities to try and find jobs. But the cities aren't great places either because they're overpopulated, they're crowded, and so they're very short on housing and short on jobs. So people are coming there to try and save themselves, and they end up with no job there either. There are also many insects in Africa that carry disease, and that's one of the big problems with the population of Africa. And so some of these insects include the tsetse fly, which is this fly right up here, this insect right up here. And the tsetse fly carries something called the sleeping sickness, which is a parasite that can kill humans as well as the cows that they're growing for food. And so it's a nasty fly, it's a nasty parasite that this fly carries to the humans and the cattle. And mosquitoes are also a big issue in Africa because the mosquitoes that are there spread malaria. And malaria is something that can also kill you for sure. And about 90% of all the deaths from malaria in the world are found in Central and West Africa because of the level of mosquitoes that are there. But also a lot of these diseases and things are treatable and preventable, and if you can get immunizations and things like that. But a lot of people in Central and West Africa just can't afford to take action to actually stop it. And even if they can afford to take action, a lot of them just don't understand how or what action to take to prevent these diseases. And so there are people that are trying as hard as they can to get out there and do education programs in rural Africa to get these people to understand that these diseases can easily be combated and easily be stopped.